Scheißegal. Okay, we're almost ready. Just give us like 1 or 2 minutes. Vasilis, we're seeing you. Everything's fine. 1 or 2 minutes. Okay, so hello back, everyone. Hope a lot of people could join us to the Zoom call and it worked out for you. We are now in an interactive mode, kind of, and we have Vasilis with us. We're seeing you on screen here, Vasilis, but we're going to switch to your presentation later on.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you in the room at least, and I guess so the people on the stream on the Zoom call as well.
Fantastic.
The Zoom call is streamed to YouTube, so people can also watch. I updated the redirect thing, but you have to properly refresh your browser. There is a Zoom, a YouTube URL as well. I'm going to post that one a bit later. Vasilis, many people have seen you yesterday on stage already. It was fantastic. We are super excited to learn more about that. You can't be with us today, but I'm positive that this is not a problem at all. By the way, there is John in the room, and John, he's back there. I don't know if you can see him. We've got this 360 camera. Okay, Marcus, yeah, okay. And John wanted me to tell you that he would like to have you as his professor. So if there is a chance, because I think he's got a lot of time, so maybe, yeah, so maybe he just wants to study again. I had to tell you this. So, without further ado, this is your stage, Vasilis. I'm just going to switch to your slides here and just go ahead. We are really excited. So where is your, okay, just give me this. Okay, go on.
Okay, well, thank you very much for having me again. And I'm so sorry that I can't be there. I would really have loved to be there physically because, to be honest, I really don't like talking to my screen. I mean, whenever I make a joke to my screen, which is silly. Okay, so I am. Yesterday I talked about well, the research that I did. And today I want to talk a little bit more about the teaching that I do. So how do I teach about accessibility at the university where I work in Amsterdam? So there are, simply said, I think there are three ways to look at accessibility. There's the one way, which I think is the most what most people do when we talk about accessibility, at least on the web, is that we engineer accessibility. And then there's a second way, which I teach a lot, which is designing accessibility, which is not so much about, well, I'll explain that later, what it's about. And then the third one, which I think is really lacking at the moment, which is artistic accessibility, and which I think is really something that we need. And I hope I can explain why we would need that. Okay, so let's start with engineering accessibility. I have all these windows over my screen. Okay, engineering. So I work in this university. It's the University of Applied Sciences in Amsterdam. It has many buildings. Some of them are very old, like the one you see on the right, which it's a very old building. And back then, when buildings were built, they did not have to be accessible. So to enter that building, you have to climb stairs. So the doors are not on ground floor. You have to climb stairs. Now, I work in the other building you see on the left, which is a bit more modern, but even that building, you cannot access it without well, some assistant if you are in a wheelchair. So you need some assistance to enter that building. Now, I asked the people who are responsible for the building, is this accessible? And they said, yes, it is. Yes, our whole building, all our buildings are completely accessible to everybody. Now, I invite people over every now and then who are in wheelchairs or people who are blind. And, well, technically, it may be accessible according to the building guidelines that we have in the Netherlands. But to be honest, no way that these people can access all places in the building without assistance. So, for instance, they cannot even enter the building without assistance. They need somebody else to open the door for them. They need somebody else to control, for instance, an elevator to get them up to ground floor. And they even need, I'm not sure if that's fixed now, they need somebody to open the door to the toilet for them. Now, imagine that you're thinking about studying at this school, and you just cannot enter the school at first, and then you want to go to the toilet and you have to ask somebody that you don't know if they can open the door for you. I mean, this is just completely, if you ask me, it's not just inaccessible, it's unusable. And we have the same way of looking at accessibility on the web. I'm not saying that this is useless. I mean, there's lots and lots of good knowledge in the success criteria or in the WCAG list as we know it. I mean, there's so much knowledge in there. It just, if you apply these rules to the web, it's not it's not sure that it's going to be a usable website for everybody. It just means that you passed a test. But it doesn't mean that people can actually use your website. And this, I think, is one of the biggest problems that we have with accessibility, that we've had with accessibility for the last, 30 years that we've been teaching accessibility, is that applying the good rules of accessibility to your website does not mean that the website is a good website or even a usable website. And I think this is a very weird thing a weird problem that we have created. So in a way, sometimes I think we're teaching the wrong things. We're trying to solve the wrong problem. We're trying to get people to just tick off the boxes of these success criteria instead of looking at who's actually using these success criteria. Okay, so I mean, it's not bad. It's a good thing that these things are there. So, for instance, this is the website of Mooi, which is a Dutch company, a design company. They make furniture, design furniture, and they expanded to the United States. So they have physical shops in the United States now. So this means that they're.
Welchen Designgrad soll das denn sein?
Was there a question from the public or? Okay, I'll just go on. So this means that in the United States, their website has to be accessible as well. And it wasn't like, let's say, 96% of professionally made websites. So a former student of mine, she fixed it. She worked on this website and she just looked at the success criteria. And actually, she did a very, very good job. Now, I looked at this website today and there's all these animations on it. And I cannot believe that this is really truly accessible. But I think this is an example. The Mooi website is an example of a website that's trying to be accessible, and it's beautiful as well, right? It's a beautiful experience. There's lots of beautiful graphics in there, lots of beautiful stuff happening, and they're really trying hard to be accessible. I think this is really cool. Another example of a former student of mine, she gave a talk recently at our university, and she's now hired as the accessibility expert at WeTransfer. You might know WeTransfer. It's a website for sending large files to other people. Very simple website. It's basically a form. And it turned out it wasn't accessible, which I think is just incredible. How can you make a simple form not accessible? But she's hired as the accessibility expert, which I think is a good thing. So she's applying the guidelines to this website. So let's say the awareness of that accessibility is a very important thing. I think that's starting to grow. And more, what I see of my former students are becoming accessibility experts in some way or another, which also is a very good thing. Okay, so if I look at, does it work? I've been attending conferences, web design and web development conferences for over 20 years, I think. And I think we've been promoting accessibility for over 30 years. And if I look at these numbers, if I look at what Manuel told us, that 96.8% of most visited websites in the world are not accessible or have accessibility issues, I'm really starting to wonder, does this strategy pay off, or do we have to look at accessibility maybe in another way? So what I'm doing, I'm looking at accessibility in another way, at least when I'm teaching it to my students. So there's this individual project in the first grade for bachelor students. So the first year at our university, they're just starting out. And we give them this assignment to make a tailor-made experience, something, I'm not sure exactly what the brief is, but it has to be something for one person, which is also pretty weird. We don't usually do that on the web. On the web, we always work with lots of people or target groups or maybe a persona, but not a real person. So here it's a tailor-made experience for this one person. So they start prototyping, they make a prototype. And then in the second week, we tell them, we forgot to mention something, but this person, they have a disability. So they might be blind, or they might have a motor disabilities, something like that, or deaf. It depends a little bit on the brief. And then all of a sudden, after a week, we tell them, sorry, but your prototype, you probably have to rethink it a little bit. And here that we offer them two ways of looking at how they're going to solve this. So I give them the WCAG list and I tell them, you can find all the knowledge that you need in there. Look at it, study it, and this is a fantastic starting point of your design career. To have this knowledge and to know where to find it and to know what the success criteria are, this is a very good starting point. But I also give them another way to approach it, which is exclusive design. Then we'll talk about that later. But then there's another course that I'm teaching, which is front-end development. This is a second grade course for bachelor students. And it's basically about learning CSS and HTML. Now, we start this course with, they're going to recreate a website that already exists, a website they like. It's really about learning CSS. So we don't want them to design something new. We want them to recreate something that's already out there so they can focus on the CSS and don't have to focus on the design bit. Now, we start this course with testing the existing website with some accessibility tools. So for instance, we tell them, use your screen reader to try and navigate the website. I'm not sure if you've ever used a screen reader, and I'm not sure if you've ever seen a class of 25 students using a screen reader for the first time, but this is just a room full of frustration. There's all these kids which is, what? How does this work? And turn it off. They cannot stand the noise of the screen reader. And I tell them, well, this is the experience that lots of people have to just navigate everything on their computer. Just imagine that your computer sounds like this all the time. I think it's a pretty depressing sight to see all these. It's fun as well, of course, for me, but it's pretty depressing to look at so many students having so much trouble trying to understand how it works. And even after a week or 2 weeks of using a screen reader, it's so hard, it's so complicated. I mean, these are extremely complex tools to use. So this is something else that we teach. So this is just, let's say, trying to study how does this work, how do these screen readers work, and also trying to imagine how do people have to use our websites. And this brings us, I think, to designing accessibility. So when I talk about the difference between engineering accessibility and designing accessibility, engineering for me is about the guidelines, and designing accessibility is about the people who are going to use it. And to be honest, I always miss the people in our accessibility talks. So here's a very good example. Well, this website is probably not a good example anymore. I don't think it's accessible anymore, but it used to be a very good example of designing accessibility. So a long time ago, my friend Johan Huikman, he's the accessibility expert at Q42, a fantastic Dutch agency. He gave a talk about how they designed or how they made this website this is the Dutch website of all the public transport on it, how he made this website accessible. And so they built it, and then somebody did an accessibility audit, and some technical issues came out of there, and they put those fixes, the fixes that they suggested, they put it in their code, in their HTML. And then Johan looked at this code and he thought, I'm not sure if this is actually usable. Most agencies will stop there, right? They fixed it, they passed the exam, they tick off all the boxes, and that's good enough. Johan said, I'm not sure if this is good enough. So he went up to somebody who's blind and asked them, can you go home? And they couldn't go home. They just couldn't figure out how it works. And this is it's a basic idea, right? That you just test it with somebody that you just worked for. But this is so weird that this is not the common way to do this. So then they came back with a design team, not just a development team, not just the engineers, but they brought together some interaction designers, some visual designers, and they thought about how should we structure this? How should we fix this? And they really saw it as a design problem and not as an engineering problem, which can be fixed with a list of ticks. So I think this is an excellent example of how this should be part of your design process instead of just a list of bugs to fix. Unfortunately, it didn't. Another company took it over, and now it's not accessible anymore. So another thing that I do with my students when I talk about designing accessibility, so I tell them use a screen reader, but I also tell them use these devices. So we have a few of these tools to help people imagine what it's like to use the web in a different way. So for instance, I bring my iPod with headphones and I turn on the music. And then, so how does this podcast work right now, right? It's if you cannot hear the podcast, what is a podcast? Or if you cannot hear the sound of a movie, how are you going to experience it? So these are some accessibility testing tools that we have. We have different types of glasses that emulate different types of visual impairment. We have this horrible device on the right here. It's absolutely horrible. You put it on your, I think it's meant to train your muscles or something. But if you put it on your arm, it just puts these, it gives you some small electroshocks, and all of a sudden you don't have fine control over your muscles anymore, of your arms. And then I tell them, okay, try to send me a text message right now, or try to control your website right now with these spasms in your arms. These are, I think, they're pretty good tools to create awareness about different types of how people have to interact with your computer or with the thing that you've designed for them. So these are tools that help with awareness. I'm also aware that some people say you shouldn't be using these tools because it's not the real thing. And of course, it's not the real thing, right? So after a few minutes of just your shaking hand, you take it off and you don't have a shaking hand anymore. And of course, somebody who has a motor impairment cannot switch it off. So this is something that I also tell them, of course, but it does create some awareness of, okay, there are people who have to interact with what I'm making in a completely different way. And when the students start testing with a screen reader, then it's similar to what I observed with the non-power users that I've tested with. So I've tested a lot of websites with a lot of people who have turned blind in the last decade or so, or in the last 20 years. And these are people who are not nerds. So they're not people like us. They don't work with computer interfaces all the time. They're just people who have other things to do, and they use a computer every now and then. And that's actually, most people are like that. So they're not experts with their computer, and they're definitely not experts with their screen reader, which is something I was expecting every screen reader user would be a real expert on that tool, but they're not. Some of them actually, they hate their screen reader because it makes so much noise and they don't know how to switch it off. So I asked them, why don't you just change the settings? Well, I tried once to change the settings of my screen reader when I couldn't look at the settings. That's the hardest thing ever. So I think in large part, the problem is not even so much with the guidelines. I think in large part, the problem is with the current generation of screen readers. They are made for power users, which means that non-power users, normal people, have a very hard time using them. And to them, and also to my students, and probably to you too, if you start using a screen reader for the first time, the web, it just turns into this very noisy, very hard to understand thing that's just screaming at you with all these words and extra words added. And it's so hard to just concentrate on what is the content actually. This is harder if you have if you don't know the power tools that are in the screen reader. Then the web is just really, really noisy. And I actually think that we should be designing for these people and not just for the happy few who really, really understand how it works. And then there's this other thing that I'm missing a lot in the accessibility talks, and that is that we're all talking about how we're solving accessibility, but where are the people that we are solving it for? this is a wonderful quote. We saw it yesterday with Jude as well. He talked about this a little bit. Nothing about us without us. We shouldn't be designing for people. We should be designing with people. We have to include people into the design process. Now, it's also a good idea to include these people into your design team, to pay them to be a designer in your team. For instance, now imagine that the deadline is closing up, right? It's closing in. It's almost time to put the website live or put this new feature live. And that's just this. It's definitely sure that you cannot ship all the features. Now, you've all probably known this. You've seen this before. One of the first things that gets scrapped off the list is the accessibility part, right? We just don't do the accessibility. And if you have a blind person in your team, there's just no way that we're going to say, well, this feature is not going to work for you, right? It makes it personal. It's much harder to say that. So make more inclusive teams and get them into your design teams. Okay, brings us to exclusive design. That's what I'm teaching at my university. So yesterday I explained how I got from the inclusive design principles to my 4 exclusive design principles. And these are the principles that I ask my students to work with. I want them to study the situation of the people that they were working for. I want them, if necessary, to ignore the conventions that are out there. So if, for instance, somebody hates heading levels, don't use heading levels in your website. But of course, it's controversial. It's let's say, not everybody agrees there, and probably I myself don't agree there as well. But if it makes the experience better for the person you're working for, you should ignore these conventions to allow us to come up with new ideas, better ideas of how could we solve these things. I also want them to prioritize the identity of the person they're working for. I want them to add their identity, their personality to the project as well. And I allow them, and I actually ask them to add nonsensical ideas to their final product. I really want them to create something that I haven't seen before, or something that I couldn't come up with myself. So I'm not going to show this movie. You've seen it yesterday. So there's a few courses where I teach about accessibility with this exclusive design idea. So this is a human-centered design course. We teach it in the 3rd grade of minor students. They're technical design students. They're really focused on HTML and CSS and JavaScript. They're really good at it as well. So they're the most technical people, but it's still a design course. So it's about the people that they're working for. It's a 3-week course where they make a tailor-made experience, a real tailor-made prototype in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript for a real person with a disability. So every year I have about 4 people who come over to a university with different types of disabilities. So I always have somebody who is deaf, for instance. And then I ask them to make a podcast for this person. That's the assignment. We have somebody who has a severe, very severe motor disability. And we ask them to make these, let's say, a drag and drop interface. How would that work if you don't have fine control over your motion? We have blind people, and we have different assignments for them. So there's all types of assignments for these different types of disability. These people come over to a university 3 times. So we test with them 3 times, and they so every time they see if their ideas work. Now, the first test is always the most interesting test, because this test is basically based on assumptions. So our students do what they know they should do. So for instance, for somebody who has a motor disability, they optimize their website for the tab key. And now the person I invite never uses their tab key for various reasons. So the first prototype, it always fails. All their assumptions turn out to be untrue, which I think is a very, very powerful way of learning things. So you have to start thinking again, oh, so what I assumed and even what I've learned here at university in the past 3 years might not always be true. How am I going to fix this? And then they have to start to become creative. This is an example. I showed it yesterday. I'll show it again. So one of the things that came out of this type of prototyping is that for this friend of mine who's really motor disabled, who has a lot of problems of going from one way of his keyboard to the other way, this student of mine came up with a new way of typing, a different way of typing with just using 6 keys, which at first sounds a little bit complicated and ridiculous to use 2 keys, a combination of 2 keys to type 1 letter. But it turns out to be a much more easy way to type if you have a difficulty with moving from one part of the keyboard to the other, right? So instead of moving over the complete keyboard, he can now just focus on these 6 keys instead. Then there's another project I would like to present to you, but unfortunately, this one just started 2 weeks ago, so I have no results at all yet. This is the minor exclusive design. So I actually started a minor. It's a 10-week course where students can, from all over the Netherlands, can actually join, and they're going to create a tailor-made solution for one person. It doesn't have to be a web solution. It's probably a digital design solution somehow, but it can also be a physical product. So it's a very broad assignment, and it's again a tailor-made experience, again for one person with a real disability. This one, the minor, is not 3 iterations. That's probably about 7 or 8 iterations with this person. So this is a real design process, a serious design process, a long-term design process to come up with a solution for somebody for something that people have wanted to be able to do all their lives, or something that they really need fixing. So, for instance, this is the example of that I showed yesterday as well, of this friend of mine who always wanted to be able to play the guitar and improvise with it. And these students, this is in another minor that they did this, but we are going to create similar products. They came up with this. I'm not sure if you can hear the sound, probably not. But here he is playing this new instrument that they designed for him for the very first time. It's such a beautiful thing. It's really shaped to his body. It's really shaped to his taste of music. So this is the kind of projects that I'm going to do with my students in the next few weeks. And then there's artistic accessibility. Well, I also showed this one of the visual closed captions thing, where I want my 3rd grade minor students, more visually focused students, to make the experience of a movie as exciting without sound. And we test this with real deaf people, so people who cannot listen. So they're either deaf at a later age, or they were born deaf. So this is that beautiful example that this student Agung Darumampen made a few years ago. This is just brilliant what he did, where he made the experience without sound of a movie that's just, it's very, lots of sound in there, and he made it just as cool as, or maybe even cooler to watch than with the sound. So well done. This is such a beautiful and really artistic experiment. This is not something that could happen if you just follow the guidelines, right? This is something when you allow new ideas and weird ideas to flourish, then you can create these types of solutions. And well, this would be so much better, right? Than just something where you hear boom, but the words say boom or something like that, right? Here, this is just a real artistic and a beautiful experience. One thing that I've done in the past, but that you could do as well, is exclusive design challenges. I've organized several of them, and I invite all types of artists and designers and creatives and teachers and just interesting people. And I asked them to solve several different problems. And one of the the very interesting things that came out of them is, what if guiding dogs could talk, for instance? This is just a fantastic idea that one group of these people came up with. And they imagined that you would walk into this room with these glasses that can watch their AI glasses. They can describe what's out there. So they would describe you're entering a room with 20 people watching you, something like that. But instead of that, you hear that in your ears, the dog would say, the dog would speak this out loud. I mean, these were fantastic, creative ideas. And I think this would be actually very interesting to turn this into a prototype. I also asked them to make things worse. So this is another good way to explore accessibility. What if trains were even less accessible? A very good way to train accessibility. And what if screen readers were designed for non-power users? This is also a very interesting thing to investigate. And this was a very weird event I attended a few months ago. It was about diversity, and they asked me to do a little bit about accessibility. And I invited this friend of mine who was in a very, very heavy wheelchair over to participate in my small workshop. But the thing is that the event was actually in a place which was completely inaccessible to people in wheelchairs, which was a very good, of course, experience and a very good way to, and a provocative way to start this event. So these exclusive design challenges, you can organize them themselves to try and to find different, more artistic answers to accessibility questions. And I don't think they're only usable in an academic environment like where I live, right? I work at university. I think they're very good at early stages, for instance, early stages of the design phase, where you can you have to explore ideas. And when you put these accessibility ideas, or where you say the accessibility brief is part of the early design phase, they can start to be creative with it. Whereas as you only have it at the end of the process, then there's much less creativity in it. Meetups are good for it, but it's also a good way for business exploration. For instance, I really see a business opportunity for somebody who's starting a new type of screen reader for non-power users. I really think this is a business opportunity for the more business-like people out there. Okay, so an example of a more artistic approach, a more designy approach, is probably Sense Math. This is an app created in the Netherlands for blind students who have to study maths. And well, I was never very good at math, but now I cannot just imagine how hard it is to understand some of these functions without seeing the end result as a graph, right? So what they did is they created this beautiful app which actually translates the visual graphs into a sound, which turns out to be a very helpful way for students to start learning math. And this is really a project where they designed together with blind people. These were involved all the time in the design process. And there's just no way that you can create something like this with just ticking off boxes in the WCAG, I think. So this is, I think, a fantastic example of what can be done when you allow people into the design process, and if you even allow a more of an artistic approach into the design process. Okay, so apart from using the inclusive design principles, I would really ask, well, I would love to see some more creativity into the accessibility world, that we allow more studying situation, that we would allow studying people, that we could ignore conventions every now and then if this is just solving a real problem, where we would not just test the guidelines but also test with real people. It would also be fantastic to include the identity of the people that we work with into the designs that we're making, and especially add more nonsense to your accessibility. Thank you very, very much for your attention.
Vasilis, I hope you could hear the applause for you. I'm just quickly stopping your screen sharing. Or maybe you could do this.
I heard it.
Okay, maybe you could stop your screen sharing, then we could see another couple of
yeah, one moment.
Stream.
How do I stop this? Stop share here. Okay. Yeah, there you are. That was so hard to do. It was so hard to do this talk without looking at your faces, because I think this is a talk that some people react to, right? This is not, and I would really have loved to be able to react to your reactions, but I'm so sorry about that, I have to do it from home. So I would love, if you have any questions or anything to tell me.
Such is life. So any questions in the room? I think you can just speak aloud and Vasilis should hear you, or the other people on the stream, obviously. And also now we're in a live interactive mode, so others could also just switch on the microphone and ask you questions. And you can use the microphone, and I can use the microphone. Yeah. Any questions?
From my side, more thank you. I wait or I shout. Okay, so I'm very used to hear people blaming developers for not doing things right. So I think it's good that designers can own it too, because if you already start adding accessibility and inclusion in the development phase, you're already too late. So the way I learned it was with accessibility and usability, and it goes together. So there is no way to get a usability without having accessibility.
Yeah.
And I like the way you do it. I'm really gonna copy some of your slides from there, some of the experiments to try to do something about it. I love the exclusive design principles that you just showed. And
please do, please copy it and share it everywhere. Yeah, fantastic.
And I love the irony of making things worse, even worse than they already are, in order to learn and get some pointers there for the future. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's actually a very nice trick to teach things to students. It's you're studying the same thing. So if you're trying to make something as inaccessible as possible, you're still studying accessibility. So, and then instead of making something that works, which we're doing all the time, we're making something that's provocative. And this is also a way of learning that you're never going to forget that you made something that's really, really horrible to use, right? Or something that makes the world just worse. And it's a good way of telling stories. It's a good way of learning stuff. So that's why every now and then I use this. It doesn't work for everybody. Some designers really, really have problems with it because they don't want to make stuff that doesn't work. And I can understand that. But it's a good way. Sometimes it works really well.
I can also imagine some designers enjoying it because they can do art.
Yeah.
So this is sadomasochism part to it.
Yeah, yeah. And I learned this from a colleague of mine. He uses this when he teaches about designing with ethics in mind, and then he's just designing the most unethical thing that you can imagine, which is also a way to study ethics. Yeah. So it applies in various ways, and it's also a very interesting way to research things. So, for instance, if you look at performance, web performance, you could also always try to make it as performant as possible, but everybody's doing that. And what happens if you make it as unperformant as possible? And maybe there's stuff out there that we don't know yet. So I think it's a very interesting way of researching as well. It just gets your creativity going.
Thank you.
Anyone else wants to share something?
I really like your approach, Vasilis, where you go and give your students the experience disabled people have. Very often, the barriers they run into, not only on the web, but also physical impairments, like this little electroshocker. It might be a bit over for some people, like saying, oh my God, you're giving electroshocks to your students? But on the other side, I love that idea. I love that idea because a lot of people have actual pain using a keyboard, or because they are forced to, but they experience pain.
Yeah.
And it's a great way to show, look, there's ways around this.
Yeah. Yeah, but I always warn them, right, when we use this, and it's not very, very painful. That I teach them how to use this thing. Yeah. I first create a safe environment where they're allowed to use this stuff. Yeah, I think it's a good way in a way, but I think it's incomplete without bringing real people in later on in their school period. So I really think the most powerful way to test accessibility and to make people understand what it means is to bring these people over and to work with them.
Totally agree.
Good. Are there maybe any questions in the chat? Because I cannot see the YouTube chat, for instance, but
the problem with the YouTube chat is always that it's like delayed for about 1 minute or something, or 40 seconds. So we would hopefully have questions in the Zoom chat, because that's in real time. But so far we just have people saying thank you, because this was a great presentation.
Okay, I would like to hear your thoughts on it. Also, if you disagree with me, I would love to hear that, because there's often when I started out with this idea, I said, okay, we'll just get rid of all semantics and everything is fixed. And then some real power users and some real experienced accessibility people, they came up to me and said, no, you cannot start promoting that kind of stuff, because that's just not the solution to the problem. And I agree there. So I would really, if you disagree with the stuff that I'm saying, I would love to hear that. And this means that I can fine tune my message, right? Because I understand that it's just not, I'm not there yet. I'm just trying something as well. So if you disagree, I'd love to hear it as well.
So this is a great chance to fight Vasilis.
I'm a big fan of semantics. I can tell you that out loud. So we need to make use of the language of new media that we already have. Yeah. But I don't want to be so close-minded, not to give any chance for disruption. Like maybe by challenging the rules, there's a place where you're gonna find something new that will be part of the language in the future. So semantics is part of a language, so it's living. And it should be open to changes too. But I agree with, I mean, a web without semantics, it would be wild.
No, but I agree, and it would be ridiculous as well. Semantics are fantastic, really helpful, not just for people with screen readers, but for everybody. I love semantics. I use them just really all the time. What I think maybe we should conclude that we should maybe see how many semantics should we use. So for instance, if you make everything a header or home pages, for instance, they often have 100 headers and 200 links on them. Then it's not as much the semantics that make it inaccessible, but the amount of items on the page that make it inaccessible. And maybe fewer semantics, fewer items helps lots of people as well. So this is also something that came out of that discussion that I had back and forth with people who don't like heading levels and people who depend on heading levels. And these are also some rules that don't show up in the accessibility guidelines, I think. It doesn't tell you there are just way too many elements on this page. Correct me if I'm wrong, maybe they do, but I think this should be one of the success criteria. There's just too much here. No way somebody who cannot see it is going to understand what's going on.
I'm going to challenge that back to you. So I think the issue with the headings is that people don't understand how headings work. So in order to have a heading, you have some content. If you only have heading, then you have content that you don't need a heading. Then I agree with you.
Yeah.
But it's
and also the other problem is, of course, web developers. Web developers don't understand headings themselves. If you look at 90% of the websites, I think heading level structure is just ridiculous. There's just no structure there. So it's hard to use heading levels as a tool if 90% of the websites out there don't use them correctly. So that's another problem. But we could go on forever about heading levels.
Yeah. So now the last challenge I'm going to give, because you're blaming now front-end developers, but usually my experience, the design comes already with the headings showing as a headings. So they're taking something that looks like a heading and making it a heading, even if it was not designed properly from the beginning.
Mm-hmm. I'm not blaming front-end developers. I'm actually blaming the web. the fun thing about the web is that everybody can call themselves a front-end developer. And what we learned today is that it's actually really, really hard. If you looked at the first two talks, it's really hard to learn front-end development. If you really want to understand how this all works, how semantics works, and how you can even apply some of these new and fantastic ways of CSS into your design process. I mean, no way that somebody who just started with HTML understands the scope of it. It's so complicated. So this is a problem with the web that we cannot fix, and we won't fix it. Everybody can call themselves an expert, and nobody is. So, yeah. And everybody can call themselves a web designer. It's just that's part of the web.
Quite some people nodding here, wasn't this? You can probably see that.
Yeah. So I'm really, I don't have the solution here. We cannot fix it. It's the web. It's chaotic. It's a mess, but that's a good thing.
Okay, I think the Accessibility Club is slowly coming to an end, and usually we would have like usually we would have like half an hour of a discussion round here. There is only like 15 minutes left. And I tried to ask, or no, I didn't only try, I asked people on Twitter like a couple of weeks ago already if they got questions to ask to Stephanie and Manuel and you, Vasilis, but I got no questions. So everything seems to be clarified. No, not really.
Maybe one question.
Oh,
I have one question.
Okay.
So when will the workshop together with Beyond Tellerrand and Accessibility Club happen, where we learn exclusive design with you, Vasilis? Or we can like couch. That would be nice.
I'll come over anytime you want me to. But I'll have to bring some friends of mine though, because otherwise, yeah, it will be good. Yeah, okay, let's do it.
Well, that would be great.
No pressure.
We'll organize a workshop. That's nice. Yeah, yeah.
I'm totally for doing this with Beyond Tellerrand, but Vasilis, many of here actually know that you and I plan to have an Accessibility Club summit in Amsterdam at your high school, at the university, like 2 years ago. And obviously it had to be cancelled, but we're going to pick up on this maybe next year, or whatever your university says, or what's been possible to do. So this might also be a good chance to do it there, and you don't have to bring all these people with you. We could just go and see them where they are at the moment, right?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. And have them over at our inaccessible high school.
It's still possible to have this with Beyond Tellerrand as well, of course, and don't want to steal this idea. Yeah. Maybe we can use the last 15 minutes to just reflect on what we've heard. Like, I think there were a lot of accessibility-related talks at Beyond Tellerrand. I think most of people here in the room have been attending Beyond Tellerrand. We had this fantastic 3 presentations today. So first of all, thanks to all 3 of you. It was just amazing again. Thanks for being with us. What do you think? What are the most important challenges we could actually solve right now? What's your learning out of the last 3 days? Any opinions on that? What are you going to take home with you?
For me, it's mainly teaching, because I work in a team where we have many developers and some do front end but don't really know it. And you know, HTML is simple, so everyone can do it. And I think my role is to teach more. Like, for example, I plan to show them how they can validate the HTML, and I didn't know that utility in Edge, because I think that's a great thing because it goes through step by step. That's one thing I take home, like to talk more about it in hearing. Or sometimes they don't, they just know it. It's not an ill intention. Yes.
I think that's a great learning, isn't it? It's a great thing to take home with.
I would say for me, it's Vasilis put a lot of emphasis on that, is that we should think more about what web accessibility means, and it's not just about guidelines, not technical stuff, how to use attributes and elements and so on, but it's about users, because that's what we're doing. We're building for users, for people to use the web, and also just like to understand who these people are and how they're accessing the content, because most of us are usually very limited in the way we see a website being used. I said it yesterday, like click and touch, but there's way more to that. And Sulis also mentioned that to look more at the design accessibility than just on the engineering accessibility, if we call it. I think that that's one of the insights I had.
Yeah, for me also, not only to make things accessible, but also gives those people a good user experience, like the boing boing thing with screen readers. That I just showed yesterday. It was very mind-opening.
Yeah, and I think if I may say something here, I think this is actually, if you compare the user experience for, well, especially people who are blind, so for a screen reader, if you compare that to what we are used to or what we find accessible or acceptable, right? There's no way we would design this for ourselves. No way that we would say, well, this is good enough. If we had an experience like most people have with a screen reader, there's just so much to improve there, which is also something that is nice because it's easy to improve because everything is so bad. It's not that hard to create something that's better. So right now, in the next few years, if we start taking this seriously, designing for accessibility, it's just an easy job. It's so easy to make big steps now. So yeah, this is something that I wanted to emphasize a little bit, just how big the difference is between what we design visually and what other people have to work with.
I think in that sense, all the voice assistants are going to help a lot, because now you don't need to say we're designing for the poor blind people who knows a blind person, but it's like, hey, you've got Alexa at home, you got Hey Google, or you got Siri, do it for yourself, and then pull on the egoistically sense to bring that forward.
Yeah, absolutely true. So there's more designers also involved in designing voice interaction. The voices are getting better, much better. So yeah, it's a good thing. Things are changing for the good part. Yeah.
And it's because you just said it's easy to fix things because the situation is just so bad. There's so many things that are broken, so it's easy to fix things. And it's not just easy, but it's also important to remember that there is so much wrong that you don't have to get it perfect. You don't have to make a perfectly accessible website. It's just realizing it, and I realized it only a few years ago, it removes a lot of pressure from you, because if you approach accessibility on the web as with like this idea that you just make it a little bit better than it was yesterday. It's much easier and it removes a lot of pressure, and it will be easier for you to get to a satisfying result. But if you approach it with, okay, I have to make it perfect, it's really hard. It puts you under a lot of pressure, and that's what I talked to the Cabeza Patata people, and they said it was really interesting to see that, because we didn't consider adding alt attributes to our images on Instagram, and we're going to do that now for all the images. And I said, yes, do it, but you don't have to fix everything. Just start with the next image that you're posting. It's much easier, and if you just get into the flow and into fixing stuff, and it'll be better. That helped me a lot.
I 100% agree. It's the same experience I have. When I started out trying to get into accessibility on the web, it was so overwhelming, because there's not only the WCAG, there's all the guidelines, there's guidelines in Germany which are specific, and then you have to watch out for the actual user, which can be hard because people don't want to pay for people being brought to an agency, their budgets, and those budgets never ever include user testing, or hardly ever. At least that's my experience in the last 15 years. I think I had one client in 15 years who actively said, we want user testing. And it's not like I did only 3 projects in those 15 years. And I always try to sell this idea to my colleagues as well, who are in part not really caring about a good user experience. Like one colleague actually said, I don't care if someone can use what I'm putting out there. He really said that sentence. Like he ignores that there's people using what he builds. And I had a very hard time to approach him on the subject. You know, people have to use it. You built this for people. And I always wonder, how on earth could I make someone so stubbornly ignoring this change? Even in the slightest, you know, those baby steps. How can you push someone only slightly? Because making him change 100%, like making him turn around 180 degrees, that's impossible from the get-go.
I guess it's easier to convince this colleague of yours if you're bringing in somebody who wants to use their website but cannot use it, and just show it, right? This is one of the most confronting things that, for instance, Q42 does. Every 3 months, I think they invite a bunch of blind people over to just test all their stuff. And it's so confronting to see that every time, even such an agency that takes it really seriously, that everything is broken. So you cannot say to somebody who's sitting next to you, sorry, but you're not allowed to use this. I mean, that's just not right. That's much harder to say than when you're talking about some abstract person somewhere else on the other side of the internet line. So bringing in real people helps, I think.
What I like to do in some workshops, and this contradicts a bit what I said earlier, is that I like to dehumanize accessibility a bit when I'm working with developers, because sometimes it really works to tell them there are 94 errors on your website. And when they see, oh, wait a minute, there's an error, like I can fix that. Let's actually create a ticket. Like I was in workshops and I told them this is wrong. And you can see them writing issues in GitHub because they didn't want to have bad quality on their website. They didn't want to see like red somewhere or something, an error popping up somewhere. So sometimes this is a nice way of communicating with developers who work a bit differently.
I agree, you need to adapt to your audience. So I have different talks depending on who I'm talking to. So if I'm talking to designers, I usually talk about designing for the extremes, and that disabled people are the same as people, power users. So you're losing innovation. So you want to be innovative and you want your things to be available for the widest audience as possible. But if everyone designs for the average, everyone is doing the same. And on the other side, if I talk to project management, I talk about money, because they understand accessibility as something for the poor disabled. They're still stuck in the medical or in the charity models of disability, but they didn't advance with the science. and they don't know that people have money, people want to work, and you're losing huge opportunities if you don't do things right. I mean, it's your job to do things right. If you want to ignore it, it's your job, and you're not a good professional if you're not doing it, okay? But then you're gonna lose money. So at the end, it's gonna be on the line. You want to earn more money or not? And some people react to money, some people react to innovation, some people react to errors. So you have to find the get to know people, yeah, the biggest pain point, and then go and you can adapt it to the biggest pain point. I think there's a get to know people. You know, sometimes we don't talk to people that think differently, so that could be a good point.
Maybe I'll add something. This might not be so directly in tech, but my thesis is focused on inclusion of people with disabilities. And I was studying the approaches of different humanitarian organizations, and I had to pick out certain best practices. One thing that stood out for me from two of the organizations were how they were able to integrate this budget thing into their policy. So they were telling me about how easier it is for some of their country offices to do better because senior level management, you know, is interested in it. And while I keep hearing budget in the room, it's because money is actually very important to carry out some of these tests or to even have maybe somebody external come to look at the project and all of that. But then when this consideration is integrated into the organization's policy, one of the organizations, they charge 3% for all the grants that they get for ensuring accessibility. And the expert I spoke with was more like, sometimes you get, when you want to query the field staff, you know, why they don't have people with disabilities in local community programs. They tell you there is no budget for transportation, those little things. So right now there is budget and you have no excuse, you know. So I think having those things as part of the organization's policy will go a long way in, you know, implementing that on the long run. And if the developer or the project team knows that there is budget for this, then you have no excuse, you know. Yeah.
I think that's a very important thing to mention as well, that accessibility should be in the organization, right? So I think Schiphol, the airport in the Netherlands, is a good example of that. That they have or they used to have a very big Scrum or many Scrum teams, and I think every team, from the organizational point of view, they have to have one accessibility expert in it. So a team is not complete if they don't have an accessibility expert in it. And this is an organizational idea of them. So this was one of the product owners. He made sure that this happened because he was the accessibility advocate at Schiphol. But he knew that he wasn't going to stay there forever. So he didn't want a situation to occur when he left, accessibility would leave as well. So he made sure that this was part of the organizational structure of that company, that a team is not complete without an accessibility expert. So really getting management on board here and making sure that budget is assigned to accessibility. Yeah, indeed, that's a very important part of accessibility as well. Yeah.
Vasilis, do you have a plan for traineeships or collaboration with private companies for your students?
Well, we have lots of, we're always looking for internships for our students, but I'm not sure if I understand the question exactly, but.
No, I was thinking, so in Germany, we have sometimes a complaint that designers do not learn about accessibility or developers do not learn about accessibility.
Yeah.
And sometimes there's like a gap between universities, the real world, and the companies. So I was thinking if that was also part, like if if your students have the chance of bringing your exclusive design to companies in real life.
Okay, yeah, I think that's another problem that I'm facing. That, yeah, of course, in this ideal academic world where I'm in, we can play around with accessibility, and then in the real world, they work with a cynical art director and they say, "No, we don't care about this stuff. Just fix it." Right? That's absolutely what's happening, and I'm sure that many of my students, what they've learned in the few courses that I teach them, they unlearn it in a few weeks when they're in practice. That's, yeah, that absolutely happens. But it's also true that I do see more and more students who every now and then I meet them, they do work with accessibility and they didn't forget everything that I taught them.
No, I think that's awesome because you're planting a seed. And the biggest problem we have with what Manuel showed with the web aim is that we're creating content faster than we're fixing it. And we cannot rely on a lone writer accessibility expert. It has to be a village effort.
Yeah, true.
Okay. I would say time is up for this round of Accessibility Club, kind of. If there's one last thing you would want to say, then now's your chance. Otherwise, I would ask Mark to come to me in front of you. I'm going to switch off this microphone so that we don't get any weird sound. Where is it? Where is it?
Okay, you should hear us, hopefully. I'm not really sure. It looks like we're on screen now. Wow, this looks great. Woo! So, this was it for the 11th Accessibility Club meetup. Hope you enjoyed your time here. Hope you enjoyed the last 2 days with Mark. I think we did, yes.
I did as well, yeah. I enjoyed myself.
Yeah, me too. Thanks for being here. Thanks for your contributions. Thanks for Stephanie, Manuel, and Vasilis. Oh, we don't see you right now. Thanks for your contributions. Thanks for your questions. It was really great to have you. Hope to see you soon again. I don't know what exactly the plans are, but there is definitely going to be a Beyond Tellerrand conference in September in Berlin, and maybe there is also something the Accessibility Club does then. You will definitely...
For sure it will be.
Okay. Okay. What can I say? So, thanks a lot for being here. Please feel free to hang around a couple of minutes. We don't have to leave at once, but thanks again for the people on the live stream. Glad you were joining us. Hope you had a great time, and see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Yoshi.